Hey, it's Brett. Thanks for stopping by or returning to my channel. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by author Louis Bayard, whose latest book is The Wilds. But before we get into this, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the 6 finalists of this year's Booker Prize, which were announced yesterday. They are Anne Michaels, Percival Everett, Yael Vanderwooden, Charlotte Wood, Rachel Kushner, and Samantha Harvey. Congratulations to all of you. I'm really excited to see who is going to take this thing home. Now, a little bit about Louis Bayard. His acclaimed novels include The Pale Blue Eye, adapted into the global #1 Netflix release starring Christian Bale, Jackie and Me, ranked by the Washington Post as one of the top novels of 2022, the national bestseller Courting Mr. Lincoln, Roosevelt's Beast, The School of Night, The Black Tower, and Mr. Timothy, as well as the highly praised young adult novel Lucky Strikes. His reviews and articles have appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and Salon, and he's a contributing writer to the Washington Post Book World. And regarding The Wilds, this got a Kirkus starred review. It is also one of Oprah Daily's 20 best books of the fall. It was also selected as a New York Times 24 works of fiction and poetry to read this fall. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. I'm so thrilled you're here because first of all, I just have to tell you, I've been such a fan of yours for so long.
Oh,
And it really wasn't until I started to look back that I realized like how long it actually was, which is so weird because we're both only 35. So that was shocking to me because it was like literally all the way back to endangered species.
get out.
Yeah,
You have a
no.
copy? Oh my
I have
God.
and like I don't know if you can see the yellowing now
Yeah,
because
I
it's
do see
that.
the
Yeah, it's because it's been sitting in our library forever. But I also, the funny thing is, I have this copy of The Pale Blue Eye that
Oh
is
wow.
like the original Book of the Month
Hardbacking.
Club. Yeah, but it's like Book of the Month Club.
Oh
And it's
wow.
like
Back
when
when they
they,
had.
because, yeah, well, when they made them and they made them smaller and like I had, they made them a little smaller than average books. I don't know why they did that, but yeah. So,
Do they
um,
still have Book of the Month Club?
oh my God, yeah, it's huge. All they do now is on their spines, they have their little imprint. And I think if you take the dust jacket off, they have their imprint on the
Sure.
actual board inside. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's a big deal. It
Well,
still
if you go
exists.
back to endangered species, Brad, that's far. That is far.
Well, here's what I want to. We're gonna get to the book in a second, which is it's so good. But because I have you, I want to take it back and take you back a little bit. But for our watchers and for our listeners, so you graduated from Princeton with an English and creative writing major, and then you
Mhm.
went to Northwestern and you got your master's in journalism. This is what I found fascinating. You were a staffer at the U.S. House of Reps,
Yeah.
and you were a press secretary for Representative Phil Sharp, who was a Democrat in Indiana. Um,
Mhm.
how was that experience being in politics, and why did you leave it?
It was an accident, like all of my career. It was accidental. I had gotten this master's in journalism. By the way, it's where I met the man who is now my husband. We also met there, and so
You
I
met
couldn't
in
go
wait, wait, you met at the which where did you meet?
at a Medill, Northwestern
Okay,
University, the Medill
okay,
Journalism School
Northwestern.
master's
Yeah.
program. Um, so yeah, so I thought I was going to be a reporter and work for print newspaper back when that seemed like a thing to do, and I couldn't. No self-respecting newspaper would hire me, so the only job I could get was as a press secretary for this guy named Phil Sharp. Um, Interestingly, his candidate that year was his opponent that year was a young Mike Pence. That's how long
Oh
ago
my
this
God.
was. But anyway, so
Wow.
I started at 17,000 a year, which wasn't a lot even then. And then I came back and worked for Eleanor Holmes Norton for about a year and a half as a communications director. For those who don't know, she's the local DC delegate to the House. And
Mm.
then also did some flackery for nonprofit groups and stuff like that. But the best part of those jobs is they made me realize I don't want to make a career in politics. It just doesn't float my boat, honestly. It's weird. I still live in DC. I live on Capitol Hill, just a few blocks away from the Capitol, 6 blocks from the Capitol, to be specific. Um, but I don't really want to be part of that world. I realized that pretty early on.
It's funny because I was talking to my son. He's a poli sci and a Spanish major, and he's in Madrid actually doing study abroad this semester. And I was saying that we were talking today, and he was like, "Well, ask him about the whole press secretary thing because I think that's something I would like to do." And I was like, "Well, I'll be sure to ask him." But seeing as he's not doing it anymore, I don't know that that's what
It's
his
not a
like
bad job.
passion was.
Yeah, there are worse jobs to have, and it is a kind of fiction writing, really, isn't it? Right? Every press
Sure,
release
yeah,
is a fictional exercise. So,
sure.
um, but
Now,
um,
are you a history buff?
I am. I am. I was an English major, but if I hadn't been, I would have been a history major. And I love history. I always have. But it had never occurred to me to combine those two interests until I did Mr. Timothy. But I've always been
Sure.
fascinated by history. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is it's interesting. Like your first two books, Fool's Errand and Endangered Species, which we just talked about briefly,
Hmm.
were effectively like romantic comedies that are set in
Yeah.
DC.
Yeah.
Um, and then you started to make this switch, and I don't know if it's a niche necessarily that you found taking these historical figures, but is it something you just kind of fell into? Or you thought, okay, this could be an interesting route to go as you started the first book.
Well, I should add that the first two books were published by a gay and lesbian press called Allison Books, which is no
Uh-huh.
longer, which has been out of business for some time. Their offices were in Hollywood, California, right across the street from Grauman Chinese Theater,
Oh, really?
overlooking Hollywood High. Yeah, um, but yeah, I had this idea of wanting to get out of the gay and lesbian ghetto at the back of the Barnes and Noble. I wanted to get
Mm.
to the front of the store, and I had this idea of writing a book about Tiny Tim, who, and that was, there were two reasons behind it. One is I loved Dickens. He was probably my favorite author growing up. And I hated Tiny Tim. I always hated him as a character. I just didn't believe him. I thought he was lying. So I thought, well, it would be interesting to make him a grown up and explore what it's like to be Tiny Tim, when all that, when the crutch is gone and all the sentimentality that surrounded him is gone. What would that be like? And then I thought, oh shit, if I'm going to write this, I need to do a lot of research in Victorian London. And I was cowed at first because it just seemed like such a large task. But as soon as I
Mm.
jumped in, I realized how much fun it was to explore these lost worlds, to reanimate these lost worlds. And so that's kind of where it came from. It was, again, an accident that I ended up there. It started with Dickens and Tiny Tim, and then it just went from there.
Yeah, and like just for anyone who doesn't know, I mean, like Pale Blue Eye has Edgar Allan Poe, The Night School, Christopher Marlowe, Roosevelt's Beast, Teddy Roosevelt, The Black Tower, Eugene Vidocq. Vidocq, am I pronouncing that correctly?
VDOC, yeah. That's
Vidocq,
right.
Courting Mr. Lincoln, obviously Mary Todd Lincoln, Jackie and Me, Jacqueline Bouvier, and Lem Billings, by the way, who I didn't even know was a real person. I had to look that up afterwards too. I thought that
I
was all
hadn't, I didn't know it
fictionalized.
either until 2 years before I started writing that book. Yeah, yeah.
So, and then of course the latest book, The Wilds, about Oscar Wilde and his wife. Um, I have to read it's, and then we'll go into the book a little bit. It's the New York Times recently said in their list of 24 books to read this fall, they referenced, in referencing The Wilds, it said in classic I don't even say Bayardian fashion. Is that what we're saying?
I've never heard it
Um,
pronounced, so I don't really know. It's the first time I've
Bayardian
been an
fashion,
adjective. It's the first time I've been turned into an adjective. Yeah.
where you take a historical novel with real people and create a fictional a historical story and take an account of it. But I loved that. I was like, now you're it's a descriptor now. It's a Bayardian
Exactly.
fashion.
Exactly.
I'm going to
We
start to
know
use
we
that
know
with
the
all
first
other books.
future lexicographer's note. It began here. Yes.
That's exactly right. Okay, so for our listeners and viewers, can you tell a little bit about The Wild? And the other thing I would love for you to do, because this is what
Mhm.
I found surprising, but maybe not, is I was reading some reviews of the book, and some people weren't even aware of who Oscar Wilde was or what happened, which is shocking to me, but hey, it's what it
Oh,
is.
yeah.
So I would love for you to tell what your book is, but if you can
Mhm.
also just give a little nugget of the backstory of what, led up to this story or what the
Sure,
result is, I
sure.
guess.
The Wilds is about Oscar Wilde and the family that so many people don't even know he had. For those
Mm.
who aren't up on that, he was married. He had a wife and two children, and he was very devoted to them all, and they to them. But it's funny that the story of that family has been lost over the years. The portrait of Oscar Wilde that comes down to us is this great gay martyr of Victorian London who did these very um, edgy and um, provocative works like Portrait of Dorian Gray, wrote these wonderful plays like Importance of Being Earnest, and then sort of sometime in his 30s came out to himself, in effect, and fell in
Mm.
love ultimately with a young man named Lord Alfred Douglas. A scandal erupted when Lord Alfred Douglas's father went after them. There was a libel case which Wilde lost. He spent nearly 2 years in brutal um, hard labor in Reading Jail and elsewhere, and was a broken man after it happened. So that's the martyrdom story that's come down to us through the years. But a lot of people don't know that in the wake of that scandal was this family, this wife and two children, who had to leave England, who had to change their names, and who led very tragic lives of their own in the succeeding years. And I thought, you know what? Their story hasn't been told that I know of in any kind of fictional or dramatic setting. So I just thought this would be a good way to come at it. The challenge for me was that it is so damn sad what happened to them all that I thought, God, I don't know if I want to dwell here in this world for the 2 years it takes me to push a book out into the world. So at some point it dawned on me that I could write it as an Oscar Wilde comedy because in Oscar Wilde's theatrical universe, tragedy and comedy are always intertwined. They're in almost all of his plays. Comedy and melodrama are kind of woven together in really interesting and provocative ways. So I thought work against the grain of the sadness by writing it as a kind of high comedy in an Oscar Wilde style. And then it just became enormously fun to write because that meant I could tell jokes and I could create these wonderful sort of Lady Bracknell kinds of characters and come at Oscar Wilde and his family the way that he himself would have as a playwright.
Yeah. And the thing that you do that I also think it's just, and you do this on all your books. What I love is it's your POV that you choose. It's kind of like what you did, because I just had recently read Jackie and Me before, and taking that from Lem's point of view and kind of through his lens, but taking this from so much from Constance's point of view, the wife,
Mhm.
and then of course we get into the kids, the two sons later. I just thought was ingenious because we so many people do know that story and the kind of the sameness of, and so what is the fresh spin on this? But uh, this story of kind of, it's not the woman spurned necessarily, but there is that huge betrayal that takes place,
Mhm.
and her realization and following her as she starts to come to the realization of what's actually happening and what's going on with her husband. I think it's fantastic.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, Constance herself is an interesting character. And again, she hasn't gotten her due. I remember that 1997 movie about Oscar Wilde with Stephen Fry and Jude Law
I
as
watched
the,
it yesterday.
yeah, yeah. It's a great movie, but Constance is this very tangential character. As I recall, Jennifer Ailey plays her. And
Amazing.
as I recall, she just sort of stands there looking sad
Yes.
about
Yeah.
the way things are going, and she doesn't have any sort of separate internal life. So the more I read about her and realized that she was this progressive reformer, she was this feminist, she was a writer herself, um, and that they had this, they lived this very bohemian in this very bohemian world. She wasn't just this housefrau waiting for Oscar to get home. She had her own dreams and ideas and philosophies, and I just wanted to represent that as best I could on the page. I mean, I'm all about finding the story that doesn't get told. So, for instance, Lem
Hmm.
Billings was Jack Kennedy's best friend, but also a closeted gay man. I don't think a lot of people knew that. I know I didn't for the longest time know that. In Courting Mr. Lincoln, I'm looking at the sort of love triangle between Lincoln and Mary Todd and Joshua Speed, who many people speculated about his relationship with Lincoln. I think there's a documentary coming out, isn't there? If it's not already out
Is
about,
there?
yeah, yeah, about Lincoln and Speed. So looking, okay, what would that have looked like to somebody like Joshua Speed? What and to Mary Todd, who many people just know as the crazy first lady, but had a very interesting, and again was a very interesting, accomplished young woman. So it's just about, even with famous people, you find there are areas of their life as with Oscar Wilde, that people don't know about. And that to me is the joy of writing historical fiction, is you get to go into those places where the historical record sometimes just falls silent. And then you can go into those rooms and figure out what might have happened.
How do you find your subjects? Like, how do you what speaks to you that says, okay, this is interesting to me, or how does that happen for you?
Uh,
Is there any kind of, or maybe it doesn't? Maybe it's just suddenly something like
it just,
lands
I
down.
won't say it drops from the sky because I do a lot of Googling and I do a lot of, reading on the side. But yeah, I'm not sure how it happens. Something latches in my head and I think, oh, that could be interesting. That might be interesting. I will say though that sometimes whatever those ideas get shot down by my agent or my editor or somebody like that. So I have a lot of ideas that never kind of amounted to anything, just because there wasn't a lot of excitement about it. Even with Oscar Wilde, I think it took me. I had to really write the book before anybody knew. Anybody, including me, knew what was there exactly. And then I think once
Interesting.
it was there, yeah, because I couldn't define it very well when I started. I just knew I just had a feeling, I had an intuition about where to go with it, but I couldn't explain it very well until it was there.
And is there any person or subject that you've started on and started to go down the road and thought, this isn't working, I can't do this?
Yes, I have an ancestor who was an accused witch back in Hartford, Connecticut in
Mm,
1662. It was 20 years before the Salem witch trials. There was a witch panic in Hartford, Connecticut. And she was eventually sprung because she was related to Peter Stuyvesant, who was the governor of New Netherland or whatever it was called back then. I thought, oh, accused witch, this could be fun. And I've tried to get that book off its feet twice now. Written 10,000, about 10,000 words each time, and each time it just won't lift off. So it's just one of those. I think every writer has a book in the drawer, and that is
sure.
currently my book in the drawer. I'm still waiting to find a way into it. The Puritans are hard. That's part of it. They're not a lot of fun. So yeah,
You're not finding
as you,
you're not finding the humor. It's a
yeah,
little more of a
that
stretch.
would be the problem. It'd be very hard to find the humor there. So, but again, I just got an idea about it just a couple days ago. I was like, oh, what if I did that? So I may come back at it again, or it may just stay in the drawer forever. I don't know.
You spoke before about writing this book with a sense of humor or incorporating humor into it, and it's certainly there. I mean, I laughed out loud quite a lot, and
Good.
especially with Lady Wilde is such a genius character.
Thank you.
Oscar's mother, and she
Oh yeah,
really did
yeah.
feel like such a cross between Wilde's Lady Bracknell, who you mentioned, and
Yes.
also the Dowager from Downton Abbey. Um,
I love it. I love
I,
it. Oh yeah. We'll see if
I
we can
kept
get Maggie Smith to play her while she's still.
that's exactly right. While she's
Yeah,
still kicking it, and I thought of that too when I was watching that movie because Vanessa
Vanessa Redgrave.
Redgrave
Yeah,
playing her in the film.
yeah,
But yeah, she's such a great character. Can you talk a little bit about the sons?
sure.
Um, and
Yeah.
and and also, I think it's I reading afterwards, and this is not to give away anything. I just thought it was such an interesting bit that. Can you also talk about your correspondence with?
Mm.
Is it Vivan? The son,
Vivian's.
Vivian.
Yeah, yes.
Vivian.
Back in
Is
the days
Cyril
when
and
boys
Vivian
would
are
be
the two
named
sons?
Vivian. Yes, boys were named Vivian.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, so they had two sons. Cyril was the older one. Vivian was the younger. Um, and then, yes, in the wake of the scandal, after the scandal, they changed their last names to Holland. Cyril went on to become a sniper in World War One, which was fascinating to me when I first learned it. And then Vivian just sort of hung on, became the sort of sole surviving heir of Oscar Wilde, and then late in life had a child named Merlin, and his son Merlin is still alive, living in France, still working on his own impending volume of Wilde's scholarship. So Oscar Wilde's grandson is alive and kicking and very much kicking. So one of the real thrills for me was reaching out to him and asking him questions, not about Oscar Wilde, which he gets asked a lot about, but about Vivian, Merlin's
Mm.
father. What was he like? And that was really helpful to me because Vivian gets his own act. The fourth act is all Vivian. So it was really wonderful to make that connection and then just send him the book in his French address and know that he'd gotten it. I don't know if he read it. He said he was going to read it on the train that following week, but don't know if he did or if it's up his alley. I mean, it is a work of alternative fiction, so I don't know if that's something that he would enjoy. But I appreciated his help, and I appreciated. I guess I considered his blessing, to go ahead with this project about
Sure.
his grandparents.
Uh, I think it's incredible. And just the fact that to have that kind of link to it is so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Oh yeah. No. I mean, I actually when I sent it to him, I actually cried a little bit because I thought, oh my God, I'm sending this to Oscar Wilde's grandson. It was this very powerful moment for me. Yeah.
So back to construction. So do you set out for yourself kind of a broad outline of the historical facts and then begin to insert how do you work it through?
How do I work it? I do about 3 months of upfront research just to be able to walk around in this world. And then I kind of let the story tell me what I still need to know, which is often considerable. And I never do learn enough in my own head. I learn enough to tell the story, but I never become an expert, I should say, is what I mean to say. But yeah, the research sometimes drives the story. Sometimes the story shapes the research. But so I knew I wanted actually, it was going to be a 4-act structure, because that's what Wilde's plays were initially, except for the importance of being earnest. They were written in 4 acts. So that's the model I was working on the whole time. And the first act is much longer because so much has to be set up and so much exposition
Sure.
has to happen. But then I got to the end of the 4th act and I realized, oh, this is kind of a bummer way to end it. So I thought maybe we can get a 5th act in here, which makes it more Shakespearean. But and what would that look like? What would the 5th act look like? And it becomes a kind of alternative world, in which the Oscar Wilde story plays out in a different way. And that's as much as I want to say about it. But I love the idea of revisiting basically the 1st act and giving it a new ending because the original ending was so damn sad.
Yeah, I loved that fifth act. I thought it was brilliant and strangely devastating at the same time. But also but also beautiful and not giving anything away. But I just thought, wow, this is kind of ingenious and it really resonates. I can't wait for people to kind of discover that
Oh,
last
good. Thank you for
piece because
that.
it's
Thank you.
it's so great. Were there any surprises that came up for you when you were investigating this or researching it?
Well, the 5th act was a total surprise. I didn't even know it was coming until yeah, as I described earlier. Surprises. I mean, it just the more I learn, I mean, I was surprised about everything. The fact they end up in, Constance and her 2 children end up in Italy. They're on the lam basically, and they're living there. And there's this shady Italian doctor that she meets, and there's this woman. She was the Raja of Sarawak. Back in the days where there were white Raja, she was the Rani, excuse me, the Rani of Sarawak, and she was
Mm.
hanging out with her. And it was just fascinating to me, like the peregrinations that they followed. And then how did Oscar Wilde's older son end up as a World War I sniper? That's just extraordinary. You would never expect that to happen. And then to read about, read their letters and read some of the stuff that they discussed. I should add, as you know, some of the letters are used as kind of interstitial documents throughout the book. Partly because we weren't sure how much people would know about Oscar Wilde, as you mentioned earlier. People carry a sort of different levels of knowledge about him, so I try not to assume too much. But I think it helps to have a little bit of a familiarity with his scandal with Lord Alfred Douglas, and that's easy to come by.
Well, it is easy to come by, but it's also shocking to me too after, learning that part of his problem, I mean, Oscar Wilde's problem was his own hubris to think that when he was suing for slander and then it didn't go through, if he kind of would have kept his mouth shut, he
Yeah,
probably would have been okay.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
at least maybe not in the long run, because who knows, where that would have led. But he really kind of uh, created his own downfall, so to speak.
Oh yes, yes. There was definitely hubris. That's the perfect word to describe. I think he felt himself untouchable because, of course, he was so famous.
Yeah.
That he was one of the most famous men in England at that time, and is hugely successful playwright as well. His plays were running simultaneously, on the West End, and he was just, yeah. I'm sure he just assumed he couldn't be touched by all of that, but he sure was.
Do you think, let me ask you this, and I still wonder because it brings up so many questions just about their relationship, meaning Oscar and Constance. Do you think he loved her? Do you think there was
I
a love
do.
there?
I do. In fact, the very first document in the book is a love letter he wrote to her back in 1884, very early. I think it's 1884, and they're very early in their marriage. Now, I think it was very much a love match, and I should
Mm,
add too that for the first 30 years, his orientation seems to have been predominantly heterosexual. There's no record of him having a lot of homosexual liaisons during that time. His romantic attachments seem to be to women like Lily Langtry, like Florence Balcombe, and the affection he felt for his wife feels real. I mean, they had children very early in their marriage, so I think it just. Over time, he came to realize his true orientation. It was his friend Robbie Ross who was I think the first man that he had sex with, and once that door was open, he walked right on through. Yeah.
yeah. It makes you wonder too how things could have potentially been different, and they were kind of potentially ahead of their time, this kind of cowardice kind of designed for living, in
Exactly.
some
That's a great
ways,
analogy. Yeah.
of what it could be. It reminded me a little bit. Did you read, I don't know if you read The House of Doors by Tan Twang Yang,
Yeah.
about Somerset
Yeah.
Maugham? And again, there was that thing of the kind of hidden life of this husband. And
Hmm.
certainly we know these exist, and certainly they exist today. And there's plenty of people that are in marriages or in relationships, and things are kept on the down low. But it is fascinating to me to think this man probably could have saved a lot of heartache and trouble
Yeah.
if he just kept his mouth shut.
Or even left England. People were
Sure.
begging Wilde to move to Paris because it wouldn't have been an issue there. But he was very stubborn about that. He didn't want to. He didn't want to turn and run like that. Interesting, you bring up Somerset Maugham because he did leave England.
Mm.
He never. He left and never came back, and partly because he wanted to live this life with his partner, with his lover, and they stayed together for the rest of um, mom's life or the partner's life, but they were together to the end. But they realized we can't do this in England, and we're talking now the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. So it was a while before England was a hospitable place for gays. It was sodomy was a crime
1967.
until yeah, sodomy was
Yeah,
a
I
crime.
looked.
67. Yeah,
That shocked me when I looked that up. I was
the
like, wow, that
felony.
was a long time.
Yeah.
And so I don't think people realized how difficult it really was. It's not like today where everything's accepted and happy. Okay, totally separate because I know we started to talk in the beginning, and back to our friend Angie Kim, who loves and adores you. And I'm not going to call you out and make you sing anything, but she said that you're quite a musical fan.
I am, yes, yes, I am. No, Angie and I have sung together. Actually, we entertained a whole book club one night. We sang "I Know Him So Well"
From Chess.
from Chess, yeah, and appropriate
She's
because it was for the Lincoln book, so it was appropriate that a man and a woman were singing about the same dude. Yeah, yeah.
I love that. I love that. Well, this has been fantastic. I am so excited for you. Just so people know, I know you're an Indie Next List for September. You're on 28 books to read this fall from Oprah. You're in the New York Times 24 books to read this fall as well. So kudos and congratulations on all that. It's so well deserved. The book is just truly fantastic and a delight.
Um,
And are you going on tour with it?
I am indeed. I'm going to be in let's see, New York, Chicago, Kansas City, St. Louis, Philadelphia. Uh, yeah, kind of running around a bit. You can go on my website and there's a tour graphic there,
Right.
louisbayard.com.
Are you coming west or not yet?
No, oh, I'm doing a virtual event with Warwick's in San Diego, and
Okay.
Benjamin Dreyer is going to be the interlocutor for that one, so that should be fun. That's
Oh,
so yeah.
nice.
For all the people who can't get to the actual stores, there's this virtual event coming up. But every time I put out a tour, I get my these friends are just whinging. It's like, why can't you why aren't you coming to Texas? Why aren't you coming
Of
to California?
course. Of
There's only
course.
first of all, I don't have any choice. I go where they send me.
Yes,
But
of course.
there's only so many bucks places that any book has for its
Yeah,
promotion.
that's
I'm just
exactly
grateful
right.
to be sent anywhere at all because I'm so yeah.
Well, you deserve it. You deserve it.
Such a
Thanks.
pleasure meeting you finally.
Thanks.